touch. Taking a score from a few moments ago.
Applied landscape design first got involved with the project actually for Westfield at Stratford City. Although we'd pitched for the PQQ for the Greenway project, we were unsuccessful, but it gave us a chance to focus our attention on what we wanted to achieve in relation to the Olympic projects, and we started to make contacts with people that we knew that were working in the area, not necessarily directly for the Olympics, but on projects that were associated with the Olympics. So we first got involved in what is now known as the Gateway, because thousands of people come through Stratford City. And from there we started to find out more about other projects, and by chance happening somebody asked me how to plant a tree on a podium landscape. We went to talk to them and found ourselves on a sort of a shortlist pitching for work at the village itself. So we then found ourselves involved in the plots and the living roofs, and then ultimately the public realm. Our client is currently Lend-Lease, who are the developer responsible for the development of the village, and their client is the ODA. We first got involved with Westfield, I think probably as early as 2008, and then found our way onto the village appointment in 2009, and from the podiums in 2009, living roofs by the end of 2009, and public realm into 2010. So we've had a site presence with the public realm from 2010 right the way through to now. We're still on site. Yes, they were sort of consecutively, separately appointed pieces of work, from sort of site presence role through to design roles, and now we're into facilities management and maintenance roles. Decent chunks of work at a time, but individual appointments, yes. If I start with the podiums, we were initially appointed to provide a series of design strategies to guide the structural design and detailing of the built form, and from that point we were appointed to take it from concept design right the way through the tender process and on through the construction phase. For the living roofs, a very exciting piece of work. We were teamed up with Biodiversity by Design as ecologists, Tim O'Hare Associates as soil scientists, and an engineering practice called Bridges Pound, and the four professional consultancies came together to deliver the living roofs, and that project is across the whole of the village, and it delivers 3 different habitats. And we started right from sampling the sites local to the village to understand what plants were there and what soils were there. And once we'd established the natural material, the team developed lightweight species, and the team developed lightweight soil mixes and species mixes that we could actually use on the roof. So mimicking, not exactly matching, but mimicking. So that role went from research right the way through the detailed design process, through the delivery process, and onto site. So as you see the aerials and fly over the village, you can hopefully see that there are green plants across the village. Very early on in the master planning strategy for the village and the Lee Valley, the ecology and the sustainability side of things was very high on the agenda. So the initial planning application, outline application, put a large focus on the environmental side of things to fulfil those early planning conditions, and just as an integral part of the whole development of the village, it was very important that the habitats that we were creating ranged both from the areas that we as the public use right the way through to the areas that the bees and the insects use. So we were keen not to bring in plant material that was sort of alien to the area, so we were able to develop the design, look at successful landscapes in the vicinity and in the southeast, and use those test results, be it pH levels or soil types or sand particle measures to actually develop a series of habitats across the village. Those habitats are now in place across the buildings that are there and will also guide the future buildings that come on as subsequent development. So in terms of the legacy, that information will continue to feed through. It will continue to drive a very organised and mimicked environment, but it will be a very naturalistic rooftop across the entire Athletes Village, or East Village as it will be known. I think one of the key innovations that were applied at the village is the master plan is very driven by the environmental factors. The whole backbone to the development evolves around a sustainable urban drainage system, and whilst that technology isn't new, it's, I think, innovative in that the master plan uses it and works with it as a system. The integration of water through the landscape, the filtration beds, the polishing ponds are all part and parcel of the master plan. It's not been a tick box exercise, it's been very much a case of designing with those tools in hand, almost without thought and process, to make it happen. So the rainwater that falls on the roofs, the rainwater that falls on the podiums and on the landscape all finds its way into a series of pools. From those pools it's fed through the filtration system, and I think the size and the scale of the project that has enabled that to happen is innovative in its own right. In addition to the SUD system, I think the ecology and the environmental aspirations are integral and also paramount in the master plan. I think we've probably all been party to projects where we add bird boxes or we add bat boxes, whereas here the entire thing is sort of built around those parts. We haven't had to think about them, they've come naturally. The species mixes in the lawns are thought through and developed to deliver an environmentally friendly, sustainable landscape that recircles, the system recycles the water. So as it passes through the landscape and feeds its way into the village wetlands, it's then recirculated back through the village and establishes the trees and the lawns and the planting areas. I think the biggest challenge we faced was the scale of the project, with effectively 11 buildings, 12 buildings in amongst the public realm. We had to work through the interfaces with those developments and those buildings and those properties. We had to work around utilities installations and the creation of new roads, the creation of new underground tube station access points, and everybody's vying for space and vying for time. So I think the biggest challenge we had was ensuring that the quality, the attention to detail stayed with the project and stayed with the landscape finishes throughout the construction process, despite the pressures and the drivers from everybody in all areas, in all interfaces and on all boundaries, because the village is obviously bounded by Westfield in the south, by the park in the west, and by the basketball and the BMX arena in the north. So even the outward facing boundaries was a challenge. So amount and time and attention to detail. I think the master plan was an all-inclusive master plan. It didn't initially divide up the site into the Westfield development or into the village development or into the park development. The whole Lee Valley aspiration for redevelopment and regeneration of the area kept everything together, and with that the designs have come together with very strong interfaces and strong boundaries. One of the first town hall workshops I went to was all of the parties from all of the teams, making sure that you didn't feel like you were walking from one environment to another environment to another environment, that the whole thing comes together as one. And we put a lot of effort into even the small material selections to make sure that when you move from Westfield into the village in the future, because you can't at the moment, but when you move from those two boundaries, you are still walking on the same material finishes. The curbs are the same. There is continuity in the landscape, even though there was never an overriding design guide for the materials. Ultimately, the Athletes' Village is the legacy. The Athletes' Village is very much designed to create the community in the future now being only about a year away. And I think it was almost a reverse in the village. The village was then adapted to provide for the athletes, and the village, the facilities were then reworked for pre-games so that the athletes, both Olympians and Paralympians, could be housed that close to the park facilities. So I think the village as we see it is probably closer to its legacy, and there's probably less work to be done from a landscape perspective in the village than we would expect to be seeing in the park. There's a lot of work to be done in the accommodation because they didn't put any kitchens in. So if it's a 2-bed flat, during games mode it was a 3-bed flat. So they put extra flats, they put extra bedrooms in. Where there would have been a kitchen, there was probably a bedroom instead. I think our biggest achievement was getting the project finished on time. We believe it's on budget, and with a really high safety record, a really good safety record for the number of contractors and personnel working on site across the whole of the village, all of the plots and all of the public realm. I think it's had a really good safety record. As Applied Landscape Design have been appointed on the public realm for what we would know as stage F of the landscape work stages. We've been responsible for the detailed design and the construction phase, information production and on-site monitoring and assistance phase. So we're very much involved in delivering the master plan, delivering the village, delivering the vision. And through that we've spent a lot of time working with the materials that make that happen. So I consider we've been successful if people can enjoy the spaces and the places that have been created and not worry about the materials and the finer detail. So the biggest lesson I've learned is that if you really want something to happen, you've got to understand the materials that you're working with, and you've got to really transfer that information, that design information, that technical information, to the people who are going to build it. With the number of people involved in building a project the size of the village, there's multiple teams, multiple contractors, multiple landscape packages, and multiple people monitoring and making sure it's happening. So I think that what we've learned is if you really want it to happen, you've got to get that information down on paper and across in person, and to do that, communication, good communication is paramount. For example, we had a series of lessons learned and good bad workshops, not with the people that run the project, but with the people who are actually delivering it. So we were able to talk to them about what the specification meant in terms of material sizes, joint sizes, programming, best time to plant materials, best time to be seeding. And we were actually able to talk to the guys in advance of standing out on site in the wind and the rain, and we were able to get together and share experiences and share an understanding as to what we wanted to achieve, so that when we were up against it on time, we weren't standing out in the wind and the rain saying that's not right, it needs changing, because we were all heading towards a common goal. So despite the size of the project, we were able to keep that communication and personal involvement in the project to make it happen. Common goal. I think people could take away, certainly from the Athletes' Village, a real understanding of a hierarchy of spaces from the master plan, both from sort of the living roofs to the semi-enclosed podiums through to the public realm. The public realm is made up of a series of spaces from predominantly hard landscape spaces at the heart of the village, which is where the academy and the polyclinic are, right the way through a sort of a transition from the sort of the hard, soft, through to the very soft, which is the wetlands and the sort of the polishing ponds and the environmental areas. So I think there's a lot to be taken away from the master plan and learned from the master plan. From our perspective, in terms of the detailed design and the delivery phase, I think the key thing to take away is that communication and using landscape architects' experience in the detail is important to a project, and having us on hand to do that and to be there as a resource enabled us to build things right first time and hit the goals and hit the deadlines that we're after. So taking away from the project, I would repeatedly urge landscape architects to stay involved and keep their clients informed and be involved in the construction phase. As a team, we were ultimately appointed to have a site presence. So we've had 2 or 3 people on site at the Athletes' Village for the best part of 2 years. What that's offered to the project is a continuous resource. People aren't having to stand around waiting for inspections or waiting for a week until the next approval process or the next progress meeting. By having somebody down there in the offices available, I would say 24/7, but it was largely 7 days a week, not the 24. Having people available, take a phone call, I found a utility, I can't plant the tree, we can make an instant decision. So the project has really benefited from having a landscape architect there. Often the role is fulfilled by engineers or architects, whereas we've been able to take on board the sort of the lead consultant role and provide that day-to-day support. I think that's unique to this as a project. There's not many projects that would sustain multiple landscape architects on a day-to-day basis. But I think people recognised very early on that the project wouldn't get delivered on time if we went with a very traditional weekly progress meeting or week after week inspections. I really hope that it's a vibrant community, a sustainable community, full of people, full of families, full of friends, full of employees, full of local residents basically. The village is obviously a very temporary phase in its life. We handed over the project in March to LOCOG. LOCOG then set about the temporary works, putting in the athletes' facilities, the games rooms, the non-alcoholic bar, the shops, the post offices. So it's a very artificial environment. Whilst I've been fortunate enough to go to site during the games, both the Olympics and the Paralympics, I have been able to see it in use. We're all now waiting for spring 2014 when it officially becomes part of the London street scene. So it's another year yet before we see people moving in. So 4 or 5 years after that, it should be up and running. It should be a vibrant landscape and a vibrant community. I think the Athletes' Village will become an integral part of London. Whilst we're used to it having a fence around it at this moment in time, I think once those fences go and the neighbourhood starts to bleed into the edges and the new Stratford regeneration starts to bleed out into the neighbourhood, it will become an integral part of that area of London. Obviously the village itself is just part of a wider regeneration. The coming years will see more development, more housing, more facilities, and this is just part of it. Those of us who've had the opportunity to enjoy the summer of 2012 will remember the bits that are the village. I think with time those edges will become blurred and it will just become a catalyst for further regeneration. I hope it raises the profile of landscape architects. I hope it raises the profile of the type and the scale of projects that we're involved in, and I hope it raises the profile of the range of work that we do, both from the inception and feasibility in the master planning phase right the way through to the detailed design. From my perspective, the hands-on, the delivery phase, it would be great that people understand what a landscape architect does and how we bring value to that phase. I think from the roles that landscape architects have played, you can see that we've been present in the whole process, right the way through, from master planning right the way through to the detailed design and the delivery phase, be it the park, the other areas, the other stadium, through to the village, where obviously I have the personal experience. Yes, landscape architects have been involved throughout. I don't think there's anything that's not involved a landscape architect. We are currently involved in the maintenance and management phase, so it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop here. I'm really keen that people stay involved and see it through to the next phases, which I'm very aware that that's happening from a landscape perspective. Yes. Having a landscape architect present on site all the time has enabled contractors to keep things moving. So a delivery arrives and it requires an inspection and an approvals process. The landscape architects can attend whichever part of site, and it's obviously a big site, can attend site and see the materials unloaded and can carry out any necessary inspections with the contractor there and then. We remove the risk of damage from multiple handling. We look after the trees, they're delivered just in time. We can inspect the trees as they're unloaded and planted straight away. So my colleagues Ollie and Anthony were there basically at the beck and call of the contractor. If they had any queries, levels, materials, interfaces, the mobile phone on a site that size is essential, but they could be there either as a designated time of day or just on hand to address any queries that the contractors have. They're doing that from a design perspective. They've got the master plan, the aspirations, the quality in their mind, but they also realise that we have a project to deliver. So it's a challenging but important balance between contractual responses and design delivery. So they're there to address that, they're there to attend meetings, and they're there to attend site inspections. The biggest challenge on a site that size is ensuring consistency, ensuring that when they're snagging, picking up paving deficiencies or damage, it's consistent across site. So working together as a tight team is very important. Understanding the goals and aspirations of the design is very important. The team at the Athletes Village, the master planning team is or comprises of VOTS landscape architects who develop the overall master plan, the planting palettes and the hierarchy of spaces. Arups have been involved from, I think, day one in terms of the feasibility, master planning and utilities phase. Arups have continued all the way through the project. responsible for day-to-day site engineering and utilities and engineering aspects. Applied landscape design have been involved on podiums, living roofs, public realm, and there are other practices, Grossmax and McFarlane Wilder, who were involved in other plots, and Kinnear Landscape as well were involved in a couple of the plots, and the Academy, which is going to be a landmark facility for the regeneration of the area and the creation of the new community. So there's a number of landscape practices and engineering practices involved in the public realm. On top of that, you've then got a whole multitude of architects involved in the delivery of the individual plots. The Living Roofs project that we led brought together the specialisms from soil science, ecology and engineering into one team to deliver that aspect, that project as so a whole number of consultants in that as well, irrigation and ecologists. We had the Living Roofs brief was to develop a series of specialist habitats across the rooftops of the village, and these are the inaccessible roofs. We had a tight budget and we had loading constraints because the buildings were already designed. So we were able to bring together the design information for the structures and the research information from the studies of the existing landscape habitats, and the brief almost wrote itself. We need to achieve a certain number of species in a certain area, and we need to deliver it within a very tight budget, because there was a very strong push at the time to roll out sedum mat over all of the living roofs. So we really pushed hard for the habitat and the environmental aspects versus a very standard off-the-shelf delivery. The podiums, the brief was very creative, looking for a landscape that will support the residents and potentially a very mixed group of residents. The podium areas are semi-private, so they're not accessible to the public, but they are part and parcel of the hierarchy of open spaces. So the brief was to include play areas for under fives, to include potential future food production and food growing, to provide diversity of spaces for both relaxation and enjoyment, coupled with a number of important technical constraints. So the brief was being driven by loading constraints, where you couldn't put trees where the columns were, where the drainage was. So both creative and technical brief. The brief for the public realm was very much the design delivery phase, so it was very clear, pick the scheme up from the concept and the layout proposals and deliver the detail. So the brief was very much driven by, we're at this stage in the process, it now needs turning into working and construction drawings and taking forwards into the construction phase. So we provided tender phase supports, tender interviews, pre and post, mid-tender interviews, and then on into the construction phase, working with the construction management team. The brief was clear, we were there to assist in the process and make it happen. And we are now working under a management and maintenance brief, which is about inspecting and ensuring establishment occurs now and is there for the future. We're currently appointed at the village for a facilities management maintenance contract through to the end of this year, and part of that is because we go into transformation mode, which is the process by which the village becomes a village. So we'll go from Athletes Village to East Village. So the current maintenance appointment is quite a short one. but obviously we will still be on site next year through the construction phase, where the ongoing maintenance will be a key part of that. I think visiting during the games just reinforced that it is the right design response. The athletes were all able to live together, play together, work together. There's enough open space for them to train. The number of people that were out jogging and using the facilities whilst they were there, and the feedback was excellent in terms of it was great being so close to the stadiums, it was great being so close to the park, being able to walk to events if they wanted to, but just being able to relax in the village. I think the whole atmosphere, despite the fact that we really only finished planting in March, a number of people were just astounded by the fact that it was so recent. They largely felt that it was an established landscape, and it was good. It was a good environment for them to be in. So, and having had the opportunity to go and make the transition from the village into the park, the hustle and bustle of the park, coming back into the village was just, you could see what everybody was aiming for. People were aiming for a space that the athletes could get away from it, but still be accessible to the sports and the facilities. The planting at the village is a combination of procurement routes. So a number of the trees were advance procured, were ready and available to come into site when they were needed. A number of the areas were due to be seeded, and due to time constraints and season constraints, we worked with the various contractors and the various suppliers to develop pre-grown turf mixes that could be brought in as we needed them, because we knew we weren't going to have the growing season in advance of the games starting. So the plant material in the wetlands, some of it is smaller stock, and it has grown on. It had, despite the drought order, it's had a great summer of lots of water, so it has developed. The trees, yes, were semi-mature trees to provide that instant impact and to provide the density that gives it its sense of place and creates the spaces and provides the three-dimensional landscape massing. I think key lessons for the profession are anchored in people and clients' awareness of what landscape architects do, what we can deliver, and what we're experienced in, and what we are experts in, or if we're not experts in, what we are capable of coordinating. If you take our role at the village as an example, we started off involved in podiums and garden roofs. We then moved on to living roofs when they realised that we were capable of and qualified to design habitat environments. From there we went into detailed design and construction detailing, and from construction detailing we went on to provide a resident site landscape architect. So I think our ability to sell the profession, make clients aware of the role, the integral role that a landscape architect can have, right from the start of the project, right the way through to the end of the project, is a key lesson to take away and to spread the word.